Welcome to another episode of the Reboot Chronicles, a no-holds-barred forum with global leaders, authors, entrepreneurs, and CEOs about how organizations stay focused on growth and innovation in unprecedented times. I'm your host, Dean Tobias, coming to you live from Reviv's North American headquarters in Chicago, and we would like to thank you for joining us from around the globe today. I'd like to welcome Rishad Tobaccowala, a good friend. He's a marketing visionary and Fortune 100 advisor, speaker, and author of a very timely book, I think, which is called Restoring the Soul of Business. So we're going to dig into that and try to understand how do we stay human in the age of data and how CEOs, many of you out there, can kind of reboot and restore the soul of your business. So Rishad, welcome and good to see you. How's Chicago?
It's doing well. The sun is shining and the streets are opening up, but thank you for having me.
I saw you on LinkedIn the other day, finally having a draft beer. I know you do not do bottles or cans, so it was good to see you out and about.
Yeah, it was the first time in 85 days, but who's counting?
You know, we can get you a kegger in your house. They actually have those, so maybe
yes. That's what a lot of people recommended, but my wife is opposed.
Yeah, I think that's probably a bad idea for me too. But you've got just a interesting, fascinating background. Let's just kind of dig into Publicis. You kind of ended up there a year ago as the chief growth officer and strategy head for the overall corporation, but you really drove a lot of different projects there, including making Starcom a global leader. And by the way, at the time I was the CEO of TNS Media. We had sold it to WPP. You were like one of our best clients. It was actually great to work with Starcom people, and very focused on, data and analytics and the whole kind of advertising media shtick. But it's interesting because I always viewed that was so much a part of your persona and your personality. For how many years were you there?
Altogether, across all of Publicis, 37. Wow.
So there's some people listening and that aren't even that old. What was it like to kind of disconnect and become this indie guy? I know you do a lot of consulting. You still help them, but you're on your own now. What was that transition like?
The transition it's been actually very much easier than I thought, and the reason was because it wasn't a cold turkey transition; it was a planned transition. So about 3 years ago, it's now 4 years ago, I went to Maurice Levy, who I knew was going to be stepping down or stepping up as executive chairman, and he was my boss. And I'd said to him that I'd worked with him and Jack Clues for about 25 years, and both of them were retiring on me, and that at some particular stage, I'd like to do something different. And I sort of indicated that I believe that every career has a midnight hour, and the smart people leave at 5 to 12. You should never overstay your welcome. And the second is I wanted to do new things like write a book and speak and be more in control of my time. And I was going to, at that stage when I talked to him, turn 58. And the old Leo Burnett company, you were done at 58.
Yeah.
And after conversations, he convinced me that it was not 5 to 12. He convinced me that it didn't make sense to move so quickly. So we agreed to sort of a 2-year transition period where I moved to like 50% of the time so I could write my book. And so in effect, I transitioned slowly away versus instantaneously. And as you mentioned, I'm still connected as an advisor. I still do a lot of things for them. But I've enjoyed it a lot because of however much I enjoyed those years, and I clearly did. I spent 37 years. It was relatively successful. Mm-hmm. And I loved my clients, and I obviously had amazing bosses who I mentioned in the book, and most importantly, amazing teams. I wanted to be in a place where I had no boss, I had no clients, and I had nobody reporting to me. And as Ernest Hemingway said, I wanted to have a calendar where everything was free and I could decide what to do. And that is what has basically happened. And I've been somewhat fortunate that between my writing and speaking and advising and running my foundation, things have worked out well. And the only thing I'm not doing, which I thought I would do a little bit more of, would be traveling for fun, which obviously we can't do because of COVID-19. But it's turned out to be well. And a part of it is because it's been planned. A part of it I've been lucky. And a lot of it is because Publicis has been a big, big supporter even to this day of what I do.
Yeah, that's a good story. It's a lot of lessons learned there about easing out versus jumping out. I think a lot of people get into shock. Just like back in the old days, I used to move people from like New York to Silicon Valley, corporate guys into startups, and the culture shock was riveting. And you were there, during the go-go days. I mean, you
Yes.
probably, I can't, there's probably not a country you haven't been in yet. So I'm not sure why you want to keep traveling, but for fun, it actually makes sense to me.
Yes.
It's interesting. Before we jumped in the book, though, the category. So back then, WPP and Publicis, it seemed like every weekend we were buying another company, and that has really been tampered down over the last couple of years. It's what's going on with that whole sector. WPP just spun out Kantar and all
Yeah.
types of
So
activity.
there are, I'll give you very quickly two stories. One is the story that I believe, and then there's the story that the market believes. And
Mm.
right now, the market basically believes that all advertising holding companies are doomed. Uh, and if you look at the market valuation, even pre-COVID-19, they were basically at historical lows on whether it was percent of, you know, you know, on a good year, we'd be like 1.5 to 2 times sales.
Right.
And pre-COVID-19, we were all selling at about 0.9 times sales, and now it's even below that. And sort of it give you an indication. Publicis was valued at $17 billion 6 years ago, and it's valued at $6 billion today, which is and of course we've got $4 billion in debt, and this is post a lot of acquisitions. So the general belief is this is a doomed category, that we're talking about typewriters and life goes on. I don't buy that. And even though I'm no longer there, I refuse to buy that. I actually believe that what's happening is that traditional advertising is in secular decline, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is
Right.
when advertising is, but marketing is in an age of renaissance. And many of these companies, including Publicis, have been revamping themselves to be much broader about marketing and business transformation, which explains the early digital acquisitions of things like Digitas and Razorfish,
Right.
and then the business ones like Sapient and most recently Epsilon. But us people buy the strategy, but we haven't been able to yet show the growth and the results because some of our historical businesses are, I guess, failing faster than the new ones are growing or falling faster. So we tend to be minus or plus 2%, which doesn't make anybody happy. But I think you're seeing sort of this revamp where we are moving much more, most of these businesses are moving into marketing with communication versus just being advertising agencies. And that is the transition I think you're seeing. You're definitely seeing at Publicis. I think in his own way, Mark Reed is doing it at WPP,
Yep.
as Omnicom and Aegis and IPG. So I think we'll all make it there, but right now, that's the story we believe, but the market is dubious.
A lot of big brands pushing back, taking stuff in house, trying experimental agencies. It'll all go through a cycle.
Right.
Hey, how long did it take you to write the book?
From the time I wrote the proposal to the time the book came out was 2 years. The time it took to write the book itself was a year. So I basically had 12. It's already 12 books in one because it's like a Spotify playlist built around a theme where you can read any chapter. So
Right.
each chapter, the writing took me about a month for each chapter, which was about 12. And then the editing process was about 3 months. And that was, I had amazing editors from HarperCollins. They gave me 2 of their top editors. And
Yep.
so that helped a lot. And the book has now been out since January 28th. So it's, about 4 months plus.
Yeah, restoring the soul of business and actually coming out of holding companies. That's probably something they need too. You mentioned being kicked out at 58 at Leo. It was always kind of anyway, we won't go into that. I'll be polite. But tell us about the book. Why'd you write it and what's the impact of it?
Sure. So fundamentally, and people should sort of understand that I have an advanced degree in mathematics and MBA from the University of Chicago, which includes a minor in finance. And as you know, I worked a lot in the data-driven parts of our companies, including being somewhat a pioneer in digital. So I appreciate and understand the importance of data. In fact, I believe that data is so important that it's like electricity. But what I also believe is that for most companies, which company distinguishes itself by the use of electricity? So,
Exactly.
what tends to happen is we're going from the sort of the steam engine age to the electric age. So people are getting fixated about data. And there are some companies, clearly the Googles and Facebooks and a few others, that are truly data-driven companies. But in most other companies, it's essential, but it's not a differentiator. And what I began to realize over the last 4 or 5 years in business is that everybody, industry, marketers, companies, were tilting more and more towards the data, which I call the spreadsheet side of the business, and they were forgetting the story side of the business. So the spreadsheet side is really the math, the data, the digital, the numerics, all of which matter. The story side of the business is basically the values, the purpose, the talent, the culture, all of that. And my belief was that while the world was becoming silicon and data-driven and digital, that we were forgetting that we were talking about analog, carbon-based feeling people, right? And we've seen with Black Lives Matter, et cetera, people actually feel these are not robots. And as a result, I did some research and discovered something that was incredible, that companies that are focused and fixated on the spreadsheet eventually end up doing really badly, including on stock market capitalization.
I think you call them data-blinded robotic companies.
Data-blinded robotic companies. And you began to see those. So it was like Wells Fargo in banking. They opened fake accounts, right? You saw that, again, my stuff is like, somebody needs to tell people that this fixation on data isn't right. On the other hand, I'm not a person who says it's all about culture and story. Because
no, you're a data guy.
On one side,
that's why it's so fascinating. You're just like,
but you got Wells Fargo on one side, but you got WeWork on the other side, which is the marijuana-infested company, right? But here's the key thing.
Sometimes marijuana works well. For Tesla, it did. For WeWork, not so much.
Yeah, but here's what I mean. That was all about story. It was all about like a bizarre story. But here's the key question I ask, and I ask, with great what I would say respect to many of the people who probably are listening to this, who work in areas like banking and investment banking. Tell me how these fine people could value WeWork in the fourth quarter of 2019 at $67 billion, and then SoftBank valued at $2.7 billion last month. Okay, so I truly believe that they had no clue what they were doing. So when anybody basically tells me this is a data-driven decision, I said, you don't have a clue what you're doing. And if you are doing a data-driven decision, a machine will do it faster. Okay. Yep. Because what I discovered is people choose with their hearts and they use numbers to justify what they just did. And so this book basically says successful companies, successful businesses combine the story and the spreadsheet. So think about Southwest versus United Airlines. Think about Costco versus the old Walmart, right? Think about Adobe. Think about a company that was very data-driven, very closed, very mad about sales and bullshit, which is called Microsoft under Steve Ballmer. Right. Okay, 10 years, missed everything, did stupid things like Nokia acquisition, right? Stock price went nowhere.
There's a whole list of acquisitions, actually.
Yeah, Satya Nadella comes over, and he's there. He's inside Microsoft. So
he's already there. Yeah,
24 years. He's there for 24 years. He basically gives everybody a book called The Growth Mindset. He says, no longer are we going to basically have a know-it-all mindset. We're going to have a learn-it-all mindset. His whole stuff, this fixation on Windows is bullshit. So Windows division is gone, right? He says, we're going to be open. He buys GitHub. He partners with Linux. Stock price goes up 4 times between Apple and them. They're now grappling to be at the $1.5 trillion companies. And my whole stuff is, and you're still telling me this is about data? When you know successful companies are the combined. And so what I've done is I've used that, but I've done it, which most people realize in the book, is I am speaking to everybody in the world across all industries, across all ages. And I then basically talk about different things, like how do you manage change? How do you manage time? My opening chapter is too much math, too little meaning, which is how do you actually extract meaning from mathematics, which almost everybody has forgotten. And as a result, because some of those chapters also are leading with soul and how do you manage distributed workforces, people said, did I anticipate COVID-19, right? Because 6 of the 12 chapters seem to have been written for COVID-19. I said, no, I anticipated the future, it just got accelerated. That's all.
Yeah, I read a couple of those. It was interesting how the parallels are there. Well, you've just thrown out a lot of stuff that I'm pretty good at kind of picking things apart. We don't have time for all of them, but the WeWork S1, for someone who's taken companies public before, as a CEO myself, I did actually read the entire S1 the day it came out, and I said, this never should have got past a banker or a lawyer. So, as you know, that's just I do a lecture at Kellogg called Big Data, Small Ideas. And it's just like the reliance on something you read or track has nothing to do with what do you actually do with that data and how do you question it and how do you build a business around it. And the other topic I thought it was interesting in the book, I do one small little lecture about finding your purpose. And a lot of people do that, but I really net mine out to a personal story where I struggled and I really came up with a checkbox of three things. It's more of a Venn diagram now. It's fun, money, and impact. And the trap about that is you can never check all three boxes every day. It's just exhausting. It's the connected tissue between those that really kind of help people find their purpose, whether it's business or personal. And you have a little different version of that about, these, on the years was, fame, power, and money, and then growth, purpose, and connections. Can you dig into that a little bit?
Absolutely. So when I was writing my book, and the book isn't about me or the marketing industry, so I did a lot of research on each of these topics because I would give people answers and they liked it, and I said, let me go and do research to see if this actually makes sense. Besides what I've discovered,
data guy.
Right. And as a result, what I discovered is that there is three things that you have to give people if you want to make them happy at work. Okay, and to your point, they vary, but these are the three what people look at when they look for money, fame, and power. Mm-hmm. And then someone basically said, yeah, you're senior, so you think about fame and power. I said, no, even if you're a young person, fame is recognition and power is autonomy. So if you give people a good salary and you give them some autonomy and you give them, some recognition, and some combination, they'll stay there. And sometimes if you give them a lot of autonomy, and you give them a lot of recognition, you can even pay them less for a little while, not too long, but you can manage those. But I recognize that while that was necessary, companies that just did that didn't actually keep people for a long, long time. There was something else that they were looking for. And these were they were looking for. The first thing that they were looking for is growth, which is, can they grow? Right? Personally, can they grow? Growth was a big thing. The second one was purpose and values. Did they believe in the company and the values, right? One of the reasons why I believe that maybe Chris Cox has come back to Facebook is Mark Zuckerberg was beginning to realize that people were leaving in droves, or they were having a problem hiring the best engineers because the reputation of the company was such, but Chris is well regarded. So one was, what is the purpose and values of the company? And the last one was connections, which is, how do you feel about your fellow employees, your bosses, and the people who work with you? And so I sort of looked at those six. And once I started applying those six criteria, it could actually differentiate not only between good businesses and bad businesses, but oddly, which I've not done this because I'm not a professional stock trader or anything else, but I think it actually also can explain market cap to a great extent.
Yep. Yeah, and I've noticed the let's just call it boomer generation. They focused more on the, fame, power, and money early in their career, and then later they moved to your growth, purpose, and connections. Yes. But with millennials and XYZs and the next ones, they're actually moving. They're moving there a lot quicker. They're not waiting.
They're moving there very much quicker, very much quicker.
And they insist on it from their leaders, which is very different.
It is, and it's one of these things where, obviously when we speak about this, it's just immediately after sort of the George Floyd incident and, Black Lives Matter. And to a great extent, people are holding up. I mean, if you look at what the young people are saying, is they say, okay, it's fine. You're saying all of this. Show me what your board looks like. Show me what your management looks like. In fact, one of the chapters in my book, which is called The Turd on the Table, which is how you speak truth to power, I rewrote it about 6 weeks ago, which is diverse faces is not the same as diverse voices, which is also somewhat prescient. Because people basically say, okay, we check the box. We have someone who looks African-American or Indian or Hispanic, but that isn't enough. Do they have power? Do they have control? Do they have a voice? And that's what now people are saying. Okay, this is not a check the box thing.
Yeah, and unfortunately with corporate governance, it's been a check the box thing for the last cycle we've gone through, and it'll straighten itself out. We have Jesus Mattis coming up next week, and Jesus he loves talking about the humanization of AI and data and everything that you've kind of focused on. And what you've said, things like, well, it's about combining emotion, data, and human and machine, both analog and digital. What does that mean?
So one of the books that were very good about this is a book by a couple of MIT professors called The Second Machine Age.
Oh, yeah.
And we can't pronounce their names, but it's The Second Machine Age. And and basically was that if you have man versus machine, in most cases, machine will beat man. Okay. But if you have man plus machine, with man doing or woman doing what they do best and machines doing what they do best, they actually will be better than anything else. So it's understanding your role. And so when people basically say, look, Deep Blue beat, the best chess player, whether it was Garry Kasparov, what people don't realize is when you give Garry Kasparov Deep Blue, Garry Kasparov plus Deep Blue always beat Deep Blue.
Of course.
Okay. And so the whole idea is this is an and world, and we're living in a world where so many things are going to be done so much faster. As a math major, I run from anything, even though I use data and analytics. I run from anything that's very math infested because my basic belief is the machine will beat me at it. So I got to add something more to it, which is what my underlying basic belief is, which is, hey, management, if you really want to be of value, you got to deal with the other side of it, right? Which is the human side of it. But people don't like to deal with the human side of it because humans are messy, right? As I tell people, everything is easy, but people get in the way. But you can't be a leader. And sometimes when leaders say stuff, I say, like, what bullshit are you talking about? Like, I don't like these are uncertain times. I said, look, unless you're a fortune teller, all times are uncertain.
Exactly.
Right? You are paid to make decisions, right? And like the other thing I get really worked about is this term called new normal. Like, for this post-COVID-19 age. I said, okay, first.
If I get one more email with that title.
Right. Well, first I said, new normal makes no sense. It's like tall short. It's stupid. If you understand English, it's stupid, right? And I said, if you really want to know what it is, it's the new strange, right? You can actually see the future. Go Google Seoul, Korea, right? Or Google Beijing and see how people are living there now. And you'll say, my God, that's strange. That's what we're going to go to. Exactly. People don't do any of that. They just use some normal terms and they just run around. They don't even think.
It's funny. We've used the slogan for Reboot Chronicles, in unprecedented times. Unprecedented times to us always mean both booming economy up to 2008, then down, then back up, then down. It's always unprecedented if you're in one of those cycles.
Exactly.
And to me, that's fun. It's like where growth and opportunity comes from, and unearthing that with data is important. Can we talk about the power of data? This could be the dark side. You can still talk about humanizing, but let's just talk about FANG. Facebook, Amazon, Google, and Netflix, and whoever else you want to throw in there. Even Uber, they know everything about where you are, where you're going. But the consolidation of power in tech is one thing, but also the consolidation of data. And what are your thoughts there? Have you been speaking about that much?
Yeah. So my perspective is that until about 10 to 12 years ago, people did not pay enough attention to the impact that technology was going to have on human life, right? It was basically much more of a backroom thing. The first domestication of the internet happened in the 1980s with, the PC and the Mac, coming out. The first change of it occurred, I believe, in 1997 with what I call the first connected age, which is basically the World Wide Web. And Google and Amazon were the two most powerful firms, and they ended up actually owning two things outside of China, which is one of them owned the search for information, and the other one owned the search for online transactions. Right? They always talk about how they don't have more than 12% of all transactions, but they have 55 to 60% of online transactions, and in some categories 90%. So shut up. I understand math. Don't change this number on me. Okay. So that was then the second generation was basically built around connect all the time, which was phones, and connect to everybody, which was social media. People did not understand what these companies were up to, so they let them acquire everybody.
Exactly.
Right. And now we're entering an age where people don't realize, like, for instance, I've always said, if you look at Google and Facebook, they're not advertising operating systems. They're society operating systems that are funded by advertising, right? And so now people are waking up to realize that what you've basically done is you've let five guys decide the future of society in the Western world. And that, I think, is damn risky. However brilliant these people are, we are all human. I keep remembering that, right? And
Right.
they all have massive personality problems. Like, Mark Zuckerberg happens to be he's a controlling shareholder who's a controlling weakness. Okay.
Right.
Somewhere along, Bezos has forgotten how to be generous. Okay. So they're all these crazy people and so what happens is, I think, one is these companies should be broken up, and that maybe, yesterday's stuff. But now we're entering this third connected age. Please pay attention. So, and the problem is these companies are likely to do very well in the third connected age. So while the first one was connected, connect to transact, connect to information, and the second one was connect to everybody and connect all the time. They of course build on each other. Right. This one is data connecting to data, which is AI, because they have so much of it. They're leaders.
Right.
Right. New ways of connecting. Voice. Who are the leaders in voice? These clowns again, and AR.
Exactly.
Much faster ways of connecting. Well, that will be 5G, but these guys will leverage it best, right? And then the last one basically is connecting to the cloud. Who are the two big cloud providers? Microsoft and Amazon. Okay, yeah, so in effect, it's very hard to compete with them because in this new age, you require scale, networks, and data.
Exactly.
And when we're accelerating into the future as we are post COVID-19, no surprise that all their stocks are all-time high.
And we've been talking for maybe 3 or 4 years about the next generation is peer-to-peer networks. In other words, the gig economy has been good for people like Uber because of the cuts that they take, the fees and everything. And then there'll be new platforms that just allow you and I to connect and get deals done with really low, transaction costs, the blockchain and all that stuff. But I haven't seen anyone come in and own that. And if someone does, it might be another FANG operator. So
well, there are two parts of it. One of them is they obviously are very prescient, so they buy all potential competitors. And Facebook's been very good at that with WhatsApp and Instagram.
I've been on the selling end of that, so I get that.
And the other one is a famous line I heard one day when I was at Google, where they basically said everybody who works in Silicon Valley outside of a few companies work for us. They just don't know it yet.
They just don't know it yet. I love that, kind of. No, I think the whole peer-to-peer thing is... and then there's some good companies out there. Adobe, Salesforce, you know Adobe very well. I've sold a company to Salesforce. I mean, they're still doing good, I think.
Adobe, Salesforce, I think a company that is absolutely amazing, which I think people don't appreciate exactly what they do, including with people. And in fact, it's not in my book, but it's one of my thing is PayPal.
Okay. Often overlooked. No one talks about them much.
Yeah, PayPal is both from a financial perspective has done extraordinarily well. But it's one of those companies where the CEO basically actually did an analysis and found that 60% of his employees worried about making ends meet.
Oh.
Okay. And the interesting thing was, if I don't look after my people, part of my book is when people basically say, I said, look, your company, the only way you can upgrade a company is by upgrading the people, bringing in new people or upgrading the people. It's not an M&A thing. It's not basically a press release. And who is your company? It's not your walls, it's your people. So you want innovation and ideas, you want a culture that people can be free about. You want good customer service, your people need to be happy, right? So what tends to happen is we underestimated how important people were in the success of a company. This guy figured it out, and among the things he did was he significantly increased everybody's base wages. He made everybody a owner of the company.
Stockholder. Yep.
Stockholder, right? He gave everybody financial training, and he gave everybody world-class healthcare, and he cut their costs for the healthcare.
Yeah, and part of their problem was just the concentration in Silicon Valley. As I've lived there, it's so expensive. In a way, this pandemic has really done a favor to these public company CEOs. I can't think of one who hasn't been humbled by this and exactly what you just said. I need to do a better job of appreciating and taking care of my people because they're not even coming in every day. At least I used to be able to look them in the eye. So I think this remote lockdown we've been through has changed that whole perspective.
There are 3 big changes that I've seen because I've been writing about this because a lot of people are asking me, and I've been spending a lot of time with CEOs and C-level executives who, by the way, are much easier to access these days. There's
Yes.
no gatekeepers, and they're lonely little people. So you have to talk to them, right?
We've had a lot. We've had a lot of them on.
Yeah. And by the way, they are wondering what they're trying to wonder. Many of them are wondering what all these gatekeepers were doing and all these staff were doing. It's like, what were they doing, right? Because now but there are three things that happen. One is if they're not in the technology world, all of them have been zoomed into the future. There's nobody now who questions technology. So I said everybody's been zoomed into the future. That's one thing. The second thing is they've begun to realize how fragile their business really is, how dependent it's on people, and they've also, which I've been pointing out for about 6 weeks, how fragile society is. I said, now just look at who's on the front lines. Like very simple statistics. In Chicago, and I wrote this 6 weeks ago, third of Chicago is African American, 65% of the deaths were African American, right? 16% of the United States is immigrants, 32% of the frontline workers are immigrants. And so everybody you are demonizing is keeping you goddamn alive, right? Which is very interesting. So there was a fragile society. There was basically their own businesses. Many of them, they're fragile. But then they begin to realize that for the first time, they were dealing with humans. And one of the key things that a lot of people have found is they actually are now engaging more with other people across screens because there's no makeup. People are visiting people's homes. Right. And they're beginning to understand the humanity of people.
Yeah, and they see where they live too. They're like,
yeah,
whoa, what is that? I really want to thank you for being on, Rishad. Just the last thing I picked up in the book was the great, I think you call it the great reinvention. I call it the great reboot. What's the significance of the great reinvention?
So to me, the great reinvention is that because of the changes in technology and because of a combination of COVID-19 and most recently, Black Lives Matter, but this was even before Black Lives Matter. But because COVID-19, people's mindsets have changed. So my basic belief is what we've recently gone through is a combination of an emotional, political, financial, and health crisis all happening at the same time to everybody in the world, right? But here's a key thing. In a chapter in my book called Change Sucks, I studied why change happens and when it doesn't happen. And what I began to realize is something changes when somebody does something or stops doing something for 30 to 60 days, right? So what has basically happened is everybody's customer or their consumers have either created or stopped doing new habits for 30 to 60 days. Therefore, my base thing on the great reinvention is the following. Number one, any business plan you wrote that was dated up to December 2019 is outdated.
Torch it. Yep.
That's number one. Number two is think about, instead of doing a SWOT analysis on your business, do a shock, resilience, mountain, and cesspool analysis, which is how is COVID-19, what fault lines of what resilience. But the third is this. This is also happening in this third connected age, which is why I call, AI, 5G, that plus this stuff. So which basically means the category you are in is no longer the category you are in. And therefore you have to restart. Don't think about restarting your business. Think about inventing your business again, starting your business. Because if you think about 2008, 2009 and the second connected age after the Great Recession,
right?
When Ford and GM came back, they started looking at each other again. But that's when Uber and Tesla were born. Okay. Schick and Gillette kept looking at each other, but Dollar Shave Club and Harry's were born. So my basic belief to
C-level, and then they bought it for $1 billion later.
Yeah, but my basic belief is if you're a C-level executive, you are starting your business and think of the following. Number one is how is your customer changed?
Right.
Number two is do the SWOT analysis. And three is start anew with only 3 rules in mind. 1, it's got to be legal. 2, it's got to be technically possible. And 3, you got to make money in 3 years or less. Okay. But start again, because if you don't start again, you're going to be Uber, Airbnb, Dollar Shave Club to death.
Exactly. Great advice. Rishad, I really want to thank you for joining us. It's good to see you. Good to see you out and about as well. I've been listening to Rishad, and he has got a great new book out called Restoring the Solo Business. It's been out for a little while, but I really recommend you guys pick it up.
It's been around it's been around 3 months, and if you just type in RISHAD on Amazon, it pops up.
Yeah, which is nice to have a name like that. If you type in Dean, all kinds of stuff comes up. So, Rishad Tobaccowala, thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for everybody who listened or watched.
Yep.